Bienvenidos a otro capítulo más para conversar en esta entrevista educativa, este espacio que hemos creado en Educar Chile para poder divulgar y dar a conocer los pensamientos de grandes educadores del mundo que nos visitan en Chile y que si no sería imposible dar con ellos. En esta ocasión tenemos un invitado de lujo y debemos agradecerle a la Universidad Católica la posibilidad de contar con él en la entrevista educativa. Este invitado se llama el profesor Stephen Ball. Él es un muy destacado sociólogo de la Universidad de Londres, del Instituto de Educación de la Universidad de Londres, que ha hecho muchísimos artículos y libros respecto a distintos temas de la escuela. Vamos a tener la posibilidad de conocerlo y conocer su pensamiento respecto a temas que tienen que ver muy fundamentalmente con la escuela, la micropolítica de la escuela, la profesión docente, la privatización que se lleva a cabo en el sistema escolar hoy día, y sobre eso hacer esta conversación. Hello, Stephen. How are you?
Hello, buenos días.
Thank you to be here. Maybe a formula to begin this conversation is about some concept that you use in your article and your production, intellectual production, and that are so important in the international discussion now. One term, for example, is performativity. How you can explain to our educators this idea of performativity?
Well, this concept, this idea is an attempt to grasp the organization and effects of the increased use of systems of classification and numeration in relation to in education, the performance of schools, the performance of teachers, the performance of students. And what I'm trying to capture with the concept is both an understanding of the systems that are operated in terms of how teachers are judged, compared, measured, categorized, but also the impact, and more importantly in some senses, the impact of that on their sense of themselves as teachers. The key thing about performativity, as I use the term, is that these systems of measurement encourage us to think about ourselves as teachers in their terms, to take on board the systems of recognition that they offer to us, either as successful or average or unsuccessful in our activities and our performance, and as a result of that to take responsibility for working on ourselves, improving ourselves, making ourselves better practitioners. And the key point, therefore, about performativity as a system of control of teachers is that it works on the basis of the extent to which you take that control into yourself and take responsibility for yourself.
We use what is the link that you see between performativity and accountability? Because we discuss in this same program with people that talk about accountability, they talk about the difference between accountability, external and internal accountability, what is useful for the system, what is useful for the school. Do you think that they have a link between these two terms? Is another view of accountability in which you are thinking the effects of or a criticism about accountability, or another dimension of accountability?
Yes, it is a form of criticism in terms of the understanding that I'm trying to develop. In a way, I'm trying to make more apparent the forms of government or control that are embedded in systems of accountability. They tend to be presented simply as a way of representing quality, but increasingly in the way they operate through observations of teachers, through annual reviews, through self-review, not only in the school but also in higher education and universities. We are expected to account for our performance, for our productivity, and make that part of the way in which we think about ourselves. And what I'm suggesting is that there's a degree of potential impoverishment in that we come to think of ourselves simply as a producer of performances, or think about ourselves as being productive in the number of articles we write. And in a way that means that we are somehow lesser human beings in some senses. And these are very, very powerful techniques which work on us in a very deep and profound sense in terms of the way in which we think about who we are, and the way in which we reflect on ourselves, and the way we value others. And the question is, in all of that, what sort of self do we become? And indeed, how do we think about and value others? Do we value them entirely in terms of how productive they are, or do we think about them as rounded human beings with a variety of qualities? So accountability is presented as simply a technical issue, and I'm suggesting it's a much more profound issue in terms of creating subjectivities, creating subjects.
Why do you think that the system of the society arrived to this level, to impose this kind of system of control of the teachers, to impose this technology of testing and try to know what exactly is the learning of the different students and so on? What is the reason of this movement? Because I suppose that you are thinking in a historical term that they have an evolution and this is a sort of new thing, it's a new phenomena.
Yes.
Why we arrived there? Is the other dimension of the society is only in education?
I think it's very difficult and complex to understand and explain, but I think we're in the era of the number. We now have a great reverence and fixation for the number. We want to represent and capture almost anything in terms of numbers, and we use these numbers to monitor our lives, to monitor the quality or performance of systems, of organizations, of groups. I mean, now you can download onto your computer a whole range of apps which allow you to monitor yourself and your health and your behavior, even to monitor the impacts of your interaction with others, the impacts of that interaction on your well-being. So we have this fixation with monitoring, making things visible, and being able to count them, being able to render them into something that is simple and straightforward, that can be ranked, compared, create a league table, a basis for improvement, measurement of change over time. And I think that all of that feeds into and is enormously attractive to governments, to politicians, as a way of managing complex systems. Performance management is an extraordinary, powerful and effective technique for the management of complex systems like education. I don't think there's ever been such a technique that relates the will of government to the detailed complexities of classroom life.
Do you think that the teacher profession, the teachers as in their professional task and work have some kind of improvement with this kind of system? You think that all is pressure, lost, and problems in their well-being?
Well, I think that the problem is in our fixation with performance and standards and quality, that we have become, our attention is entirely focused upon the outcomes and the numbers. And we've lost sight of really the purposes of education. The discourse, the debate around education has been hijacked by the number. And we're neglecting what it is that the number is meant to represent. The problem is, in a sense, that we come to value what can be measured rather than measure what's valuable. So I would want to argue that in some ways we need to go back to basics and start again by thinking about what do we actually want from our education system, and are the things that we want from our education system the ones that we're measuring, or in fact are there other things, some of which may not be measurable, that we want to give value to. But also I think the other effects of this in terms of the teacher is, and the enormous danger, is that the teacher becomes responsive to numbers, to performance, and loses sight of principles. And the whole nature of the teacher as a professional is perhaps changed in that rather than being reflexive, thinking about the relationship between practice and morality, practice and values, practice and principles, they're thinking entirely in the relationship of practice to performance.
This is absolutely important for us. We are in a country that impulse and multiply the SIMSE and the test and so on. For this reason, all your message about the effects that produce that in the education first, for the kids and their the possibility to grow, and also in the teachers is very important and crucial, I think. But what is the reaction of the teachers with this system? Not all the time is submission. I also possibilities of resistance and this kind of other kind of behaviors, or not?
Potentially, yes, and certainly in the case of some teachers, but it's I think it becomes a different form of resistance, or what I would rather call refusal, because the issue is not so much a collective opposition to policies, although that can be very important, but rather actually a struggle with yourself, or a struggle over what kind of self you want to be. So the issue then becomes one perhaps not so much of resistance but of refusal, refusing to be the sort of person that is being rendered and produced within the regime of numbers. So this means that the subject, the person themselves, becomes a site of struggle, and the forms of struggle, the forms of refusal, become not grand gestures, not political gestures in the normal way we think about those, although, as I say, they remain important, but rather struggles against refusal of very mundane practices which constantly incite you into the regime of numbers, into this sense of yourself as somebody who responds to the demands of performance.
It's interesting, and in another view that you say, well, this is all this aspect of performativity is part of the general system, but you, in your last works, you develop also the thing that the importance of privatization as another form, because in some countries they have performativity in the public sector, but you think also that you have a new force in the education that is transforms education and have enormous effects in the schools and in the teachers, which is the privatization.
Well, the other work that performativity does is it translates education into a product. It renders it into the form of a product, and once that is done, once education becomes a commodity, a good, a product, then it is made susceptible to the market form, to exchange, and further, if the practice of the teacher through those indicators can be written up as a contract, something which can be delivered by diverse providers, then that opens up education to private providers, to businesses, to profit-seeking organizations. So I think there's an important link between the two things. Sure. In effect, it's making education into something which is parallel to, exactly the same as other kinds of products. which can then be bought and sold, managed like any other business.
But also you observe and you study the importance of the private sector itself.
Yes.
That is a economic profit organization which are now embedded and working in the educational system and so on. You think that is a new actor now that is important to observe?
Absolutely. I think in terms of policy analysis and the sort of policy sociology that I do, we now need to give a lot of attention and understand the private sector and how it operates and its values and its methods and its purposes, in the same way that for many years we've been attending to the public sector and been looking at public sector policymakers and governments and administration and bureaucracy. We need to expand our purview to include the private sector. So yes, in my work I've actually been involved in interviewing educational business people. I've been looking at the financial and business plans of major education businesses. And that is now part of the field of education policy analysis.
Yes, and in general the business people has the feeling that they have a lot to teach to the educational sector. It's an attitude that is very important, I think, now. No, they have
yes,
and that they don't have this kind of thing with other professions, for example.
And a lot of politicians feel that the private sector can be a method of reform by bringing new ideas, by bringing in innovation, by bringing different kinds of energy into the system. The problem with that in some ways though is that, as I would say it, we mustn't romanticize the private sector. In terms of education policy, the role of private providers is often rendered into this rather warm and cozy fantasy version of the profit-seeking organization as bringing this energy and innovation. And we omit two very crucial things. One is business failure, which is normal in the private sector. Businesses fail all the time, they fail every day. What happens if education businesses fail? And the other is profit, that in a system of ownership or shareholders, the primary obligation of a business is to its shareholders, not to its clients. So what does that mean in terms of the interests of the state and of parents and of children? And we need to think about that alongside this more romantic view of the private sector as a reforming actor.
And maybe the parents also is an important actor in this new panorama, no? In terms that they have the school choice as a possibility, and what is the basis to do the school choice, what is change their culture in terms of the education with this possibility of school choice. Also, you study that.
Yes, yes. Well, as someone interested in the market as a configuration, as a form of social relations, I'm interested in the provider side, the supply side, which is the private sector and the public sector, and the demand side, which is the parent, the chooser, the client. So yes, I try to examine both sides of the market. And parental choice is now a universal education policy. There's almost nowhere in the world that parental choice is now not seen as the right thing to do. And it's probably been researched more than almost anything else in education policy over the last 20, 25 years. We probably know more about parental choice than almost anything else. And interestingly, what we know is mostly bad. That in particular parental choice systems around the world in many settings, in almost every setting, tend to produce increased social segregation. This
is clear, and that in Chile is extremely clear.
Yes. Although policymakers don't really want to pay much attention to that research message, because in a way it's inconvenient in relation to policies which are being offered to parents. And most parents have a very positive sense of parental choice as a right that they want for themselves. But it does have untoward consequences. It brings distortions into play, both in terms of things like segregation and the behaviour of institutions, in terms of the way in which they reorient their activities towards the interests of particular sorts of parents. So parental choice sounds as though it's something that everybody should be in favour of, but the research evidence suggests that it does an awful lot of damage in terms of the social organisation of education and issues around social mix, integration, tolerance and things of that kind.
Well, we have just on time, and maybe a last question is the same question that we have for all that we ask of all the people that are in the entrevista educativa. And if you can give Stephen Ball only one advice to our education, to our Chile education, what will be your advice?
I think it would be the same thing that I would say, and I've tried to say, to the English education system, English policymakers, which goes back to the point I made about what education is for. I think we need to re-engage with the debate about what it is we're doing and what we want from education, and in particular whether the increased use of testing and measuring is actually delivering or serving those interests and social purposes, or indeed rather is distorting and impoverishing the educational experience. So it would be my advice would be to revisit those very basic issues about what education is for.
Well, thank you very much. Y a ustedes los invitamos cordialmente a que puedan seguir otras entrevistas también en la web en www.educarchile.cl.